Our guest is James Romag, the author of Geils Band, Every Album, Every Song. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Eric. Good to be on Booked on Rock.
It's really cool to have you on this show because this is, and I've been doing this since like May of 2021. I've yet to do a Geils Band episode. So this is a long time coming for me.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've been a Jay Giles fan for, well, as far back as I can remember. But if you go online and you start searching for any books on the band, any member of the band, there's nothing there. All that's going to come up, you put in a search, and all that's going to come up is some sheet music from 40 years ago. And I thought, man, I would love to read a book on Jay Giles,
It's hard to
except there was
believe.
nothing out there.
Yeah, very hard to believe, especially Peter
Yeah,
Wolf. You would think maybe he's working on
yeah.
something.
And
Maybe,
he is, March is when that one's coming out. That's Waiting on the Moon.
okay. Yeah, that's right. I did hear about that. Did you tell
Yeah.
me about that? I think you
Yeah.
told me through the
When I
email.
sent you an email, I said I think March is the expected date. He's been talking about that for decades.
Oh, cannot
And
wait.
finally, I think it was just within the last month or so, it was announced March of 2025, Waiting on the Moon, which is that's the title of a song from, I think his fifth album, Fool's Parade.
Okay.
So
Well,
he took that song title and he's using it for his book.
and you do cover the solo albums in this book along with Jay Giles.
Briefly, yeah.
Does a nice job laying out how this band came to be as well. Let's get a basic overview, a brief history of how the Jay Giles Band formed. Goes all the way back to the late 60s, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was. It's funny. It started out with Jay himself, who unfortunately passed away in, I think, 2017. So it was Jay and Danny Klein met up after Jay had transferred for his second year of school, of college. He transferred and met Danny Klein. And together they decided they were going to start playing music. And Danny Klein asked Jay, if you're going to play guitar, what should I play? And Jay suggested bass. And that was really funny because they started out as kind of a jug blues band. And Danny actually had, because I asked him, I verified, I said, you're talking about a wash tub bass is what he started on. And I said, like in the old cartoons with the wash tub and a stick and one string. And he said, yeah, that's what he started on.
Wow. Now, is that Snoopy and
Yeah.
the Sopwith Camels? Is that the band?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What a
And that
name.
was when Magic Dick joined because he was walking through the student quadrangle there and he saw these two guys and he just asked if he could join them. He had a harmonica or two with him and they started jamming and it was this folk jug blues, jug band blues, folk stuff. And they came up with the name Snoopy and the Shop with Camels. Yeah.
And then how soon after did Peter Wolf enter the picture?
That was, I think, about 2 years because Snoopy and the Shop with Camels became the J. Giles Blues Band. And by then they had added a couple other members. It was a drummer. They had, I think, a keyboard player for a little while, and a few of the members changed. And eventually they moved to the Boston area. And Peter Wolf had moved there, and he was in a band called the Hallucinations with Steve and Joe Blad. And I talked to Paul Shapiro from the Hallucinations, and he said when they started, it was pretty much just a real casual thing. They weren't serious about it. They were serious about the music, but not as far as actually performing or doing anything like that. And they started working out some tunes. And when Paul Shapiro started, Peter Wolf wasn't part of it initially. And they just happened to meet just kind of serendipitously at a party somewhere around college. And then it started turning into more of a real thing. And they started booking gigs. And then when Paul Shapiro, he said that the gigs started falling off a little bit and he wanted to get back to art, which was his primary, that was mainly what he was interested in. And Peter Wolf and then Stephen Joe Blad joined the Jay Giles Band because the Jay Giles or Jay Giles Blues Band at the time, they were looking for a drummer and a singer. And so the five of those came together. It was Magic Dick, Danny Klein, Jay, Peter Wolf, and Stephen Blad. And they were really, really all into blues and R&B. funk, jazz. They just took all of that together, and they were really committed to what they were doing.
At some point, Seth Jman, the the keyboardist, enters too. When does he join?
Yeah, that was after they had already signed a contract with Atlantic Records, and that was not progressing all that quickly. They were trying different things, and Seth Justman had made his way to Boston to start college. And it was the story is that on his first night there at college, he and his roommate wanted to go out and see some live music. And his roommate suggested they go see this Geils Blues Band. So immediately Seth wanted to join. They told him no. And I think it was about 6 months where he was essentially following them around and just kept badgering them. And finally they said, okay, yeah. And then that's when it came together.
Persistence paid off. And when
Yeah.
is this around the time Peter Wolf was a DJ too? He was a disc jockey on Boston Radio.
Yes. Yeah. He was still in the Geils Band, had formed. He was in the band. And he did, I think, 6 or 8 months at WBCN out of Boston doing the overnight show. He was actually once they changed their format to this free form, a little more radical rock music, doing the album cuts and interviews. He was the second DJ who came on the air once they changed that format.
The band's self-titled debut came out in 1970, November of 70. So
Yeah.
let's get into that first one. The lineup: Peter Wolf on vocals, Seth Jman on keyboards, Magic Dick on harp, Jay Giles on guitar, Danny Klein on bass, Stephen Blatt on drums. So it's produced by Dave Crawford and Brad Shapiro. Few Jay Giles live classics on the album: Hard Driving Man and the cover of the 1965 song by the Contours, First I Look at the Purse. Now, you write, despite the band's rapidly growing live reputation, the debut album barely made a ripple when it was released, only reaching 195 on Billboard. Is it fair to say that the blame goes to Dave Crawford and Brad Shapiro? Because you quote Peter Wolf saying they really didn't do that much. In fact, sometimes they forgot they were even there. They just hit the record button.
Yeah, I think it might have been the style of music because they were still heavily into the blues and R&B. And when you listen to that album on its own, it sounds great. But when you listen to it compared to the later live albums and even the studio albums, it sounds a little bit flat. And that interview I found because I didn't talk to Peter Wolf directly. These are quotes that I found that he had said. He said they were great at their jobs, but they just he didn't use the word detached, but that's kind of the feeling I got. They were there, they were recording, and of course the band had been working together on these songs, like any band putting together a debut album. They were the arrangements were finished, the playing was tight, they knew what they were doing. I think it just didn't have quite the energy that it should have. But you don't notice it until you listen to later albums. And I think those two producers were on the staff at Atlantic Records. So it was kind of like, I got the feeling it was just, let's go in, get this one done and move on to the next one, whatever's on the schedule for the next day or the day after that. But the songs are great.
I would say too, I know Whammer Jammer's the most famous instrumental by Jay Giles, but Icebreaker is really cool. That's the second track on the album. Jay Giles wrote it.
Yeah. And it's funny, you mentioned Icebreaker. So I talked to Mario Medius. He was the guy from Atlantic Records who discovered Jay Giles, and he worked pretty hard to get him signed to the label because people at the label initially weren't that interested. But that song, Icebreaker, the title is Icebreaker, and then in parentheses it says for the Big M, and that's Mario Medius, the Big M.
He's the Big M.
And when he saw them, or actually he heard them first, he was at the Boston Tea Party in Boston. He was backstage and he heard this blues band out front, and he went to see who they were. And by that time they'd finished their set and they were backstage. So he was trying to figure out who they were. And he thought it was some blues band from Chicago. And it was the 5-piece Jay Giles because Seth hadn't joined it. And so Mario is the one who got him signed. And he said, that's the name of the song, the Icebreaker, because Jay told him, you're the one who got us signed. You broke the ice for us.
Oh, that's awesome. What a great title. Yeah. They bring in a well-known producer for the next album, 1971's The Morning After, Bill Szymczyk, famous for his work with the Eagles, among many others. The album charts as high as number 64, so better than the first one. Funny story in the book, Szymczyk saw the band perform in Detroit And right here afterwards, everyone went back to one of the band's hotel rooms. As Simzik explained, we were watching TV and somebody had brought a watermelon in. We cut it open and everybody had a piece, and the watermelon was rotten. Something on the TV was not very good either. And I chucked my watermelon at the TV, and Peter Wolf said, "You're hired."
Yeah,
And
it,
he's
when
in.
that was pretty funny. I was lucky enough to talk to Bill. I was surprised that I was able to talk to him, that I was able to get through. But when he was telling that story, it was just, I thought, yeah, that kind of fits because he had been, after the first album came out, somebody from Atlantic Records gave him a copy of it and asked him if he'd be interested in working with the band. And he wasn't familiar with him yet. So he went and listened to the record, liked it, and then went to see them. And he got hired based on just his attitude toward what was on the TV,
The
his preference,
attitude.
whatever.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah, one of the band's most identifiable songs, as we've already mentioned, is the instrumental Whammer Jammer, which is on here with Magic Dick just killing it on the harmonica.
yeah,
A song that came about as a way to keep live shows moving when equipment or technical issues would otherwise delay the concert. Can you tell the story behind the song title to this? And also, there's a Sonny Boy Williamson influence too.
yeah. He Magic Dick said that he picked up, it was the Yardbirds and Sonny Boy Williamson. Was it Bye Bye Bird? So he liked that, and that was he based a little bit. He was influenced by that, and then this was another Mario Medius thing. The guy, the Big M, who was the icebreaker, and he used to have an expression and just say, "Oh, that's a bad mamma jamma. That's a mamma jamma," and meaning, I don't know if I can I say it on here. Just that's a motherfucker. Can I?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what Mamma Jamma was about, and they would use this song. I think it started out as just a jam when there was a delay on stage just to keep things moving forward. And so they decided, yeah, they're going to record it, and they turned it into Mamma Jamma became Whammer Jammer. Because initially, apparently, Peter Wolf said, "Well, we can't really put Mamma Jamma on it. People are going to know what that is." And you can't really say that, at least back in 1971, you weren't going to get away with putting that on a record. So it became Whammer Jammer. I saw Geils Band with the original band lineup 3 times, and then once on a reunion tour and some other shows too. But I didn't see this, but in the early days, in the middle of Whammer Jammer, which started out, I think it was at any point in the show. And then later, because it was expected, it would be put on the set list intentionally. And toward the end, after everybody's been, working up a sweat and getting a workout, they play it toward the end, which would be pretty tough if Dick is out there after having played for 60, 90 minutes and then doing this, but he would do somersaults
Wow.
while he's playing. And when I was talking to him, I said, and that was with a corded microphone, Ethan, which would be even harder because now you got this
Yeah.
thing following you around that's getting tangled up and you're trying to uh, and he said you can't really rehearse for that. You just do the somersault and keep going.
I didn't know that he did that. That's got to be footage on YouTube somewhere of him doing that.
I've looked, and I hope
No.
something pops up eventually. Yeah.
By the way, you are right. Bye bye bird. Yeah, you have here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dick has often said the opening measures are greatly influenced by Sonny Boy Williamson the second's 1963 Bye Bye Bird. So the next song I want to talk about is Looking for a Love. They recorded that. It's a cover of 1962 Valentino song. Their live
Yeah.
recording of this would become a hit. That's included on the next album, 72's Live Full House. It becomes a hit with that version. It's taken from 2 nights in April of 72 at the Cinderella Ballroom in Detroit. And you write that the audience was so loud, it had to be pushed lower in the mix. The album charted at number 54. Some, maybe even the label Atlantic Records, may have thought it was too early to release a live album. Can you talk about whose idea that was, why he thought it would work?
They had a manager at the time. Their first manager was Ray Parrott, who unfortunately just passed away about a month ago.
Oh,
But he was their original manager. He's the one who kind of pushed them into, not necessarily pushed, but got them more deeper into the blues on a lot of their initial music. But then D'Anthony came in, and he was working with Humble Pie, with Peter Frampton and Steve Marriott, and he had some success with Humble Pie's "Rockin' the Fillmore," the live album, and so it was his idea apparently to just after two studio albums to go in and do a live album. And what's interesting, I think, on that is only two songs are from the second album that Bill Szymczyk produced, and then the rest are taken from the debut album. And I think that kind of reflects the band's happiness with Bill Szymczyk, where when they selected the songs to put on that album, they went back and probably felt they could do a better job on more of the songs from the first album and took most of it from that and didn't feel like they had much to improve on with what they had already worked with on the second album with Bill Szymczyk. You probably saw it in there. The one disappointment with the Full House album was that it's just a single album. It's not a double album. Rhino Records, who does all these great reissues and deluxe editions, they were going to release, I think it was in 2010, a double CD with both nights of shows that had been recorded for Full House, and they were going to do the full sets from both nights. And they had announced it. They even issued the track listing, and then it was just pulled for no reason. But after a little while, it looked like Rhino Records had second thoughts because no one in the band had any say in this, and the band had already thought that, well, we already put out the best of what we wanted on that single album, and they didn't want to reissue any unreleased, previously unreleased stuff, which is a little disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah. There are only 8 tracks on that.
Yeah.
Geils Band continued their rise with their third studio album. That's 1973's Bloodshot, which reached number 10 on Billboard. Bill Szymczyk back again behind the boards, and it opens with that killer riff on Ain't Nothing But a House Party, originally recorded by the Philadelphia group The Showstoppers in 1967. The single Give It To Me, number 30, Make Up Your Mind, also reached number 98. Give It To Me. Can you talk about how Peter Wolf was inspired to write the song thanks to his then girlfriend, and how Bill Szymczyk plays a role in the reggae sound, or I should say, amping up the reggae sound?
Yeah. The story is that Peter Wolf's girlfriend at the time had been in England, where reggae was just starting to get a foothold. But in the US, it hadn't really caught on yet. And there were, that was about the time Led Zeppelin had Jamaica, which had that reggae beat. Eric Clapton hadn't done I Shot the Sheriff, the Bob Marley song. That was a few years away. The Police were a few years away. Bob Marley and Peter Tosh and all those, the reggae artists really hadn't hit big in the US yet, but Peter Wolf's girlfriend brought some reggae records back. And so he and Seth Jman started working on a little bit of reggae, and Bill Szymczyk said he was the one who pushed because he was a big reggae fan already. And the song started out with a little bit of reggae influence, but the producer, Bill Szymczyk, pushed to make it as reggae as possible. And it's just a phenomenal song.
It works. Was Faye Dunaway Peter's girlfriend at that time, or not yet?
Yes. Yeah.
And, it was Faye Dunaway?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it was right about that time. Within the previous year, I think they had met and started dating. And they kept that pretty low key. So there wasn't a lot. It wasn't like they were in the tabloids all the time or anything.
Yeah.
And I saw one reference or two references where she even, while they were making that album Bloodshot, she dropped in at the studio once or twice.
Okay. Yeah. And she is part of the storyline of the next album, which is 1973's Ladies Invited, which reached number 51. This record, you write, is often overshadowed by the record before, which is Bloodshot, and the one that follows, which is Nightmares. You say only one single was released, failed to chart, which was the opening song, I believe is Did You Know Wrong, was the sole single.
Yeah.
The album cover, an illustration by noted fashion artist Antonia. It's reportedly of actress Faye Dunaway, who Peter married the following year. The album cover may have hindered the album's success. It took me by surprise when I saw the album cover right away too. Doesn't reflect Jay Geils to me.
No, and that was my thought too. Now the name of that, they apparently saw somebody in the band saw hanging in a bar, which used to be pretty common, I think, back around that time, where it would say Ladies Invited or Ladies Night or something, but there was a sign in the bar that said Ladies Invited. So they used that for the title. But then Faye Dunaway wrote, she did an HBO documentary recently, which I haven't seen, but back whenever she wrote her autobiography, she mentioned she was in Spain filming a movie, and Peter Wolf came to visit, and he told her, "Come with me. We're going to go up and see this artist Antonio, and he's going to paint you for. He's going to do the next album cover." And so, and you can tell once you know that she was the model, you can look at that and you can see not really a rock and roll type cover.
Well, like a
And I think
Barbara
that it,
Streisand album cover or something.
yeah, yeah, and which is unfortunate because there's great music on there.
Yeah,
I think my favorite one on there is it's the last song on side one. It's
no doubt about it.
No Doubt About It.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's my favorite one on there. It's just a really good Jay Giles song, and but the album cover I think hindered that, and maybe the record label wasn't pushing as hard as they could have to get something on the radio.
I think if you're younger and you're listening to this right now, you're thinking, how could an album cover do that? But in those days, that
Yeah,
mattered. You're in a record store, the album cover was very important.
yeah, and if I'm 15 years old or 12 years old or whatever, I'm looking for something with a badass cover. I don't want
Right.
this, like you said, like a Barbra Streisand style cover.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nightmares. That's the next one. Full title is Nightmares and Other Tales from the Vinyl Jungle. Number 26 album featured the number 12 single, Must Have Got Lost. And you right, Wolf wasn't happy with the art director at Atlantic Records. So when it came time to design the album cover, Atlantic brought in Peter Coriston and Pam Vassell from Album Graphics Inc. The surreal Nightmares cover image showed a man sinking into a tightly made bed, his face, hands, knees, and some toes poking through the blanket, similar to being sucked into quicksand. The painting, titled I Wish for Peace, was something Wolf had come across by abstract expressionist. Is it Jean? Boy, try pronouncing this one. Jean Lagarrigue.
Yeah. Laguerre or Lagarrigue. Yeah.
That fit the album's Nightmare title. Tell the story behind the hit, Must Have Got Lost, who it's about.
That was based on, I found Redbeard does In the Studio.
Yeah, great show.
And so I found an interview on there that Redbeard had done with Peter Wolf, and Peter Wolf said this was based on I don't know if it was his first girlfriend, but a girlfriend he had that he was in love with her, and just kind of let her slip away, and he wrote the lyrics while he was flying. I think back home after a tour or something, but he wrote the lyrics on a plane and had some ideas for the melody and sat down with Seth Jman and wrote the song. But it was about essentially not realizing what he had until it was too late. And there was no big incident. It was just something that eventually slipped away. And then he regretted it.
But it became a hit. So
yeah,
it was worth it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The band's seventh release, 1975's Hotline, number 36 on Billboard. It's interesting to see as they slowly climb up the charts. The single Love-itis failed to chart. You see, as great as the record was, it suffered from a lack of promotion. Why did Atlantic not get behind it? What do you think?
I don't know. I think it might have been because that was a shift back toward their earlier sound on the first two albums, where it was more the raw blues, and it didn't have there were some harder rocking songs in there, but I think it was more of the blues and R&B, where maybe that wasn't what was really being played on the radio at the time, and maybe Atlantic Records just sort of took the band for granted by that point.
I wonder, knowing what would be happening as we get closer to the freeze frame era, that maybe that was Peter Wolf who wanted that type of sound more, because I think that's the reason why they started to disagree around 83, 84. I think, right? That was the case.
Yep, that's the feeling I got.
Yeah. Another live album released, and this is another live classic from Geils Band, Blow Your Face Out, released April of 1976, recorded at two shows held in November of 75, the first at the Boston Garden, the second at Cobo Hall in Detroit. Detroit was a great spot for them to play. They were the song Detroit Breakdown.
Yeah, Detroit Breakdown. Yeah, that was off Nightmares, and then it was on the Blow Your Face Out live album. And they were big in Detroit from the start. Their two big markets were Boston and the New England area, and then Detroit, and that sort of spread out through the Midwest. But from the start, they were playing in Detroit and kept returning there to bigger and bigger venues. And then they were doing, I think by this point they were doing 2-3 nights at the same venue in the Detroit area. So it just kept growing and growing. So those were probably the two areas that caught on earliest.
It's interesting. That's like Kiss. Same thing. And then they wrote
Yeah.
Detroit Rock
Yep.
City.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where Did Our Love Go reach number 68? Ain't Nothing But a House Party, also released as a single from that live album. But we can't forget about Must Have Got Lost, that classic opening from Peter Wolf. This is where the DJ skills come in. As you right here, while Wolf has always been known for his extemporized Woofa Goofa with the Green Teeth Wild Stage patter, his now classic extended rap for Must Have Got Lost, titled Must Have Got Lost on Nightmares, Musta on the live album, Must Have
Yeah,
on the
it's
studio
funny
album.
because when they changed those titles, I think should I mention that in the book?
Yeah,
Because if I don't, somebody's going to think he doesn't know the band very well because he
right.
didn't realize they went from must have to musta.
Yeah,
And yeah, anyway,
yeah. So his now classic extended rap for Must Have Got Lost was, as he reiterated in a May 2016 Stereophile interview, totally unplanned, totally spontaneous. You later add, after the album was released, crowds were calling for the rap at every show, and Wolf had to listen to Blow Your Face Out to learn his own introduction to the song. You talk about how there will likely be debates until the end of time as to which is better, Full House or Blow Your Face Out. If you had to pick one, you get
yeah,
more on the second one.
you do get more on the second one, and there are a few new tracks in the mix there. It almost depends on my mood because there are some days when I just want to blast out Full House. That's short, it's fast, and it's the performance on there is just phenomenal. But then I look at Blow Your Face Out, and I think, man, the performances on there are just as great. It's a wider variety of music because you even have there's a country track on there. Truck Driving Man, not
Truck
to be
Driving
confused
Man.
with Hard Driving Man. This is Truck Driving Man.
Oh yeah, that's on the second side. Yeah,
Yeah.
Truck Driving Man.
So there's everything on there, and on both of those, the crowd is really into it. You can hear a bit more call and response with the crowd on Blow Your Face Out. So maybe there's a little more crowd interaction. They both seem just as wild and lively, though.
You've been to their shows. They have such a reputation for being a great live band. What's it like seeing them live? I've never seen them live. How
Well,
far
there's
back
so
do you
much
go to?
energy.
Did you see them in the 70s and in the 80s? When did you see them?
I saw him in the early 80s. And
Okay.
then I saw Peter Wolf, I think 2010 as a solo artist. And then I saw Blues Time, which was Jay and Magic Dick. I saw them in, I think, 93. But the Jay Giles shows were just, it was, uh, Peter Wolf is obviously the focal point, being the lead singer. But everybody on the stage was, you could just lock in on anybody on the stage. And they were going crazy. And somehow they were able to reach all the way to the back of however big the venue was and get the people all the way in the back standing up, screaming, shouting. And I still go to a fair amount of concerts, and my reaction is depends on what the artist is. Sometimes I'm really into it, and sometimes it's more like just watch the musicianship and just be blown away by somebody sitting there playing guitar. But with the Jay Giles Band, I've never been so um, uninhibited, jumping up and down, screaming, singing along, and it was like that every time I saw them.
And you saw them when they were huge, 83.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
must have
And then I
played a big
saw them.
venue. Where did you see them play?
Let's see. Once the first time I saw them, it was a smaller venue, Riverside Theater in Milwaukee, which is I think like probably not more than a couple thousand seats. And then I saw them in Rockford at the Metro Center, which I don't know what that is, 12,000 maybe.
10, 12. Yeah.
I Yeah. And then there used to be a venue near Chicago called Poplar Creek, which is a big outdoor venue. And I saw them there. And then on the first reunion tour in 99, I saw them at Pine Knob near Detroit, which is where the Showtime live album was recorded.
Yeah, I remember that reunion. They had a few
Yeah.
reunions, didn't they? They came back
Yeah.
together again after that in the
Yeah.
2000s.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
sister and her husband saw Jay Giles play a solo gig in Maine, and this was only maybe 7, 8 years ago, and it was rough. He actually couldn't make it through the entire show. He was in rough shape. very rough shape. And
Yeah. Oh,
they had to have, I think the guy who opened for him come back out. And, it wasn't long, maybe a few years later that he passed away. He was
yeah.
struggling towards the end. And then they had their legal battles too. He was out, but they kept the name. That was a whole story too.
Yeah.
Getting back to the discography, next is 1977's Monkey Island. For their seventh studio record, the band made some changes. The most visible was the shift in name from the Geils Band to just Geils, prominently displayed in all capital letters on Monkey Island's cover. In a February 1980 interview with Sweet Potato Magazine, Justman said the change to Geils was nothing more than the graphic artist idea.
I don't think that's entirely true. I talked to the graphic designer, who was Peter Corsten, who had been with him since the Nightmares album. And by the way, I don't know if you saw in there, Peter Corsten, he did Physical Graffiti. He did that
Yep.
cover. He did Tattoo You. And I mean, he did a lot of great, great album covers, but he really didn't remember that. He was just looking at the layout. I talked to him and Alan McWeeny, who did the photography for that album. And there didn't seem to be, either one of them didn't seem to recall anything about intentionally changing the name, shortening it to just Geils.
Yeah, black and white cover. That's a profile. Looks like of Peter there, closest.
Yeah. And that was funny talking to Alan McWeeny, who did the photography. I said, it's such a somber, sober image. Because I remember when that album came out, I thought, wow, they're kind of like, maybe they're getting more serious or just more reflective of things. And he said, it was a hilarious photo session. He said they had a really good time. They were all joking around, and they did it in Faye Dunaway's apartment in New York, is where that was photographed. And the photographer and the album cover designer, they were looking at that, and they said putting 6 people on a cover doesn't have the same impact as just 1 or 2 or 3 people. So that was intentional, to spread it out and figure out where's the fold going to be, and keep the band members just a little bit separated. So 3 would be on the front, 3 would be on the back.
Yeah. So when you open it up, you see the whole band.
Yeah.
Not produced by Bill Szymczyk. The album reached number 51, had 4 singles: Peanut Butter, You're the Only One, which reached number 83, Surrender, and I Do. The band is credited as producers. And this was Bill Szymczyk's suggestion. Talk about why he felt they should produce it.
Part of it was because he was busy with the Eagles, and he wasn't going to be finished with them anytime soon. And he had been apparently trying to convince the Geils Band to produce themselves. And he kept telling him, you're ready for it. I've shown you everything I've known. And you know how to do it on your own. So why not just do it? He's not available. So why not just, rather than waiting, just get on with the album? Well, a couple things came from that. One was, it took a very long time to put the album together. And the band got, it's not in the book, but the figures I found were, this would have been late 70s. They were about $400,000 in debt to the record label by the time they finished that, because they weren't touring and they were just in the studio. But Bill Szymczyk had told him, record it yourself. And when it was done, I found an interview where Peter Wolf played it for Bill Szymczyk. And he said Szymczyk had been trying forever to get them to try new things, and they kept resisting. And finally, they were trying some of that stuff. And when Szymczyk heard it, he said, well, welcome to the 70s, finally. Yeah. He liked it. He was happy. And he said anytime he worked with them, that it was just a really good time. And he referred to them several times as 6 comedians disguised as a band, just because they were so great to work with. Everybody that I talked to said the same thing. They were just great to be around, great to work with. And that album has, it's still cohesive, which is kind of odd, because the first time I listened to it, I thought it's sort of all over the place. There's pop love song. There's a little bit of doo-wop in there with the song I Do. There's some really gritty rock and roll rock music in there. There's even that Latin style, Latin tinge, the song Monkey Island, where it's just sort of all over, but it holds together really, really well.
Yeah, it's surprising, because it seems like they all got along so great, but then things go bad. But that happens with so many bands. Just eventually creative differences.
And with these guys, I think part of it was just from, I didn't put it in the book, but part of it from just some interviews over the years and just digging up, researching different things. I think part of the reason they stuck together was because, especially during the Atlantic years, the concerts were always successful. There was never any question about their live performances, but the records didn't always sell the way they should have, the way they deserved to sell. And it was, I think, out of need that they stayed together because that was all they could do was just keep moving forward. And then I think when the success hit really big, they could finally take a breather, and then some of those creative differences started to come out, and it wasn't as necessary to stay together to keep things moving.
James Romag is the author of Geils Band, Every Album, Every Song. Book is out now, I believe, right? It's out,
Yes,
I think,
well,
soon in the US,
it's
but
out in
out
the
now in UK.
It's out in the UK, yeah, and now I think the release date for the US has changed to November 1st, so about
Okay,
2 weeks, 3 weeks.
cool. EMI Records would be the new home of Geils Band. There it is. He's showing the
There
cover,
it
folks.
is.
For those just listening, we got this episode on YouTube too. Make sure you watch it. Yeah, November of 1978, they released Sanctuary, which featured the number 35 single One Last Kiss, the number 67 single Take It Back, and the title track. The album reached number 49. You write, quote, "What a difference a change of record label made. With Sanctuary, the band had the full backing of a new record company, giving Geils their first gold record since 1973's Bloodshot and their first top 40 hit since 1974's Must Have Got Lost." There's an interesting section on David Thorner, who was like the seventh member of the band at the time. He returned as an engineer. Can you talk about the extensive recording process approach that he had on this album? I thought that was really fascinating.
They had the band moved to a new studio out at Longview Farm in Massachusetts, which is, I think, about 60 miles west of Boston. And they'd already worked with Dave, brought him in, and by now Seth Jman was producing. And I don't notice it when I listen to it, but I suppose if you're an engineer or you just have the ear for that, he said that the drums had a real dry sound because he just set up in their studio portion and recorded that way. And he feels the drums were just had a dry sound. It wasn't what he wanted. And so eventually he moved and did some of the recording in there's it's an actual farm. It's a working farm. So he moved the drums and some other stuff into the horse barn, which had a wood structure. And he said it just gave it a fuller, richer sound, which is pretty funny.
There's a great story having to do with the barn I want to mention too. That's Love Stinks.
Yeah, Love Stinks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. Yeah, there was a best of release before Love Stinks by Atlantic. So Atlantic wanted to at least get what they could out of J. Geils and the material that they recorded under their label. And that best of is done well. I've seen that around a lot, the best of collection.
I think the record label at that point might have realized, oh, we lost out. And I mean, every record label does that when they an artist signs with somebody else or retires or whatever. They're still looking for ways to make money off that back catalog. And so they did the best of, which had some pretty good cuts. It ignored a couple albums, but I think the first best of did a pretty good job of picking the bigger songs.
It's the one with the bowling ball on the cover and knocking down the pins. Southside Shuffle, Give It to Me, Where Did Our Love Go, Live, Ain't Nothing But a House Party, the studio version, Detroit Breakdowns on there, Whammer Jammer, Live, from Live Full House, I Do, Must Have Got Lost, Looking for Love, 9 tracks on that best of. Love Stinks, released late January of 80, a number 18 album, thanks to 3 hit singles. The number 32, Come Back, which I love. The number 38, Love Stinks, which is another great song. And the number 78, Just Can't Wait, another song I love. This is maybe my favorite album, with a close second being the next one, which is obviously the huge hit, Freeze Frame. But
yeah,
I'm going to read what you wrote in the book here. This is so funny. Like its predecessor, the album was recorded at Longview Farm in Massachusetts. David Thorner, who had worked on Hotline, Monkey Island and Sanctuary, served as engineer. So he returns. He said, quote, "We recorded the guitars in the horse barn and several times would have to punch in to redo a spot because one or several of the horses would neigh loud enough to get my attention. Wind the tape back and punch back in the recording. Suffice it to say that every aspect of Love Stinks was a new and different way to approach recording. We would have a cable stretching from the control room to the barn so Jay could stand in the control room listening with me to the studio monitors while he was recording guitars, and the speaker stack was in the barn. In the morning, it was a funny sight to see birds perching on the cable by the dozens." What a story.
Yeah,
let's talk. That's a great story. Love Stinks, the title track. Let's talk about that one. Can you tell us what Peter Wolf had to say about writing the song? And he would come back to Faye Dunaway. Is it about her, who he was divorcing at the time the album was being made?
He was separated, I think, in the process of divorce, but he said many times in different interviews that it was not, the song had nothing to do with her or what they were going through at the time. And Seth Jman said he was talking to his brother, and his brother is the one that said, "Oh, Love Stinks." And so they claim that's how it came about. There are some other J. Geils songs on Sanctuary and Love Stinks where you wonder just how much of those lyrics are autobiographical when he's talking about just bad relationships. I'm sure everything influences songwriting like that, but Peter Wolf said that Love Stinks was not about him and Faye Dunaway. There was nothing to do with her.
What do you think about now? We're hearing some of the synth in there with "Come Back." That's, you can hear it on that one. It's a new direction for the band. It kind of sets up where we go with Freeze Frame.
Yeah, they had started using synths, moving more toward a new wave direction on some of those songs, not all of them. And I think they did a great job mixing the rock sound, because by Sanctuary, they had sort of dropped a lot of the I think they had completely dropped the blues. They still had some R&B influences in there, but it was mostly just straight ahead rock for that album. And Love Stinks still had the rock tunes, but was bringing in the new wave. And Seth Jman, I found probably half a dozen interviews with him where he was always joking, saying, well, the reason they never had all the synthesizers before that was because he just didn't have the money for them. He couldn't afford it.
That's in your
So
book.
he would stick to the Hammond and the piano and leave it at that.
Yeah, you'd assume that it was this big decision. They all got around and discussed. It's like, no, I can afford one now.
I had the money for it, so let's go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder though if the longtime fans were disappointed in the shift in the sound. That can always happen. I don't know if you can speak to that. I don't know, because I know that the J. Geils from the first album to the final album, Freeze Frame, or there's another one after that, You're Getting Even While I'm Getting Odd, from 1984. But we're really, from the first album, the Freeze Frame, there definitely was a change.
Yeah, a huge transition. And I was happy with all of it, but almost everything, I think by around 1980, you turn on the radio and you're going to hear all that. Almost every song is going to have some kind of synthesizer in it, and not the deep Moog loopy type synthesizers from like Uriah Heep or Emerson, Lake and Palmer, something like that, but the more commercial type synthesizer,
like the Cars.
I think
reminds me of the Cars sound a little bit.
Yeah, another Boston band. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think it's a matter of appreciating what's there, because if that hadn't happened, they wouldn't have been around as long. I think that's because they keep growing commercially. And if you're not commercially successful, it doesn't matter how great of a musician you are, no one's going to hear you. So you're kind of, I don't know if that's a compromise, but you look at, you either play to no one and be the best musician out there that no one is aware of, or you change your style and adapt and keep growing and bring in new fans, and do your best not to alienate any of the earlier fans.
Billy Gibbons with ZZ Top, Eliminator. That was the prime example, and it worked. Yeah. They couldn't get any higher with the next album. The success of Love Stinks sets up Freeze Frame all the way to #1 in the US, number 12 in the UK, which they rarely charted in the UK. I didn't realize until reading your book. They pretty much were non-existent in the UK. Did they play a lot of shows in the UK? Did they tour a lot over there? Was it
Yeah,
primarily?
they had from the early 70s, I think around 72, 73, they were already in the UK doing, half a dozen shows, hitting spots in Europe. And their manager back then, D. Anthony, who we mentioned earlier, he also managed Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So he put them on tour in Europe with Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And they were doing radio shows I think in Holland. They did Rock Palast in Germany, the TV show. So they were there. I don't think they were all that commercially successful, but people would have been aware of them because they came through fairly regularly.
Yeah. But yeah, they just didn't catch on until, of course, Freeze Frame, number 12 in the UK. In the UK, the album was released October 26th, 1981. So we're coming up on the anniversary of the album's release. Centerfold, the number one single. Freeze Frame, number 4. Angel in Blue, number 40. Angel in Blue, you're right, was intended as the first single, but Centerfold was chosen instead, which was a wise choice. There are different stories as to the origin of the song Centerfold. What are the stories? And has anyone in the band ever confirmed who it's about?
No, I wasn't able to confirm anything on that. Just repeat a few stories. One was that Stephen Joe Blad's had a friend whose high school girlfriend showed up in a porn magazine at some point. And so that's one version of how the song came to be. And then there's another one that said one of Peter Wolf's ex-girlfriends showed up in Playboy. And that's another version of it. One of the interesting things about that story is the songwriting credit. So you can start to see a little bit of, it wasn't evident from the outside, but I think there was starting to be a little friction inside the band because Seth Jman, that's a solo writing credit for him, rather than most of the songs by that point were Peter Wolf and Seth Jman working together.
Interesting. He's the sole writer of Centerfold, Flamethrower, River Blindness, Angel in Blue.
Yeah, and that had never happened before. It was always a collaboration.
Flamethrower is one of my favorite Geils songs.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that song. Yeah.
I love that.
It took a long time for this album to be completed too, because during this period now, the creative disagreements start to happen. The creative tension starting to surface. Was Peter not on board with the rest of the band? Was it J. Geils not happy with the direction of the band? I remember hearing back in the day, his ego is getting out of control. He thinks there was a lot of stories going around. What's been said? What's the cause of the eventual breakup?
Yeah, I didn't get much on that when I was talking to people. They just said, well, there was more friction on that album than previous ones. But exactly what the friction was, and none of it was public. So the people in the band, anybody working on that record is going to know what really happened, as opposed to the rest of us who are outside. And it's just, I think, a difference of opinion as to where the music should be going. But I've never heard them badmouth each other in all these interviews that I did, and any interviews that I've read. They're all pretty mum about that, and they just say it kind of happened. And I got the feeling when I was working on this that there was no big explosive argument or fight or anything. It was just sort of a disintegration of things.
Yeah, in fact, they made an appearance somewhere in Boston at one point when they knew it was pretty much over, but yet they appeared and everything seemed fine, and they kept it really well hidden. You mentioned that in the book. They showed up somewhere at some event, right?
At Good Words for Boston. It was some kind of tourism promotion, and I can't find that was filmed for. I don't know if it was a TV advertisement or what it was, and I kept finding references to it, and I found a few still photos from that, but I couldn't find the actual video.
And Peter's part of the next album. He's there at the beginning, which I didn't know about. This very few people even know this album exists. 1984 is You're Getting Even While I'm Getting Odd. It's not even on Spotify when I checked. I don't think. This is the final album that they made.
Yeah.
It's the only Geils Band album recorded without Peter Wolf.
And there's the
that's it.
Yeah, it's
Concealed
kind of hard to see
Weapons
with the
was
glare.
the yeah, and Concealed Weapons was the
Yeah,
single. It's got the
that's
sticker on
right.
there. That's cool. Wow, where'd you get? Did you buy it when it was
I,
released?
yeah, I bet. Hold on, hold on.
Because I'm dying to know what your response was when you first heard it. Drop the needle on that.
Yeah, I thought I kept it. I used to on all my old vinyl, which I've lost a lot of vinyl over the years, but I thought I kept the receipt in here. But the sticker on here says 6.49 was the price, six
Six
dollars
forty
forty nine
nine.
cents.
Did you know Peter
It
Wolf
was
was not on the album? Did you know at that
yeah.
time?
It was I think 2 or 3 months before this that Peter Wolf released his solo album, his first one.
Lights Out, the single, right?
Yeah,
That was a
yeah,
big. That was on MTV. I remember he got some support from
yeah,
MTV. So
yeah.
you
That
knew
one.
then. Okay. You were
Yeah.
what were
So
you?
there's another one. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Who does vocals on this album then?
It's mostly Seth Jman and Stephen Joe Blatt, the drummer, had did 2 or 3 songs. They did one where both of them took lead vocals, but both Seth Jman and Stephen Joe Blatt had been doing backup vocals from the start anyway.
What do
So
you
it
think
wasn't a
of the
huge.
songs? Are they good?
Most of them are pretty good. Yeah, there's a definite difference. It's has that new wave, avant-garde, experimental style to it, and it's the last song on there. I think is my favorite. "I Will Carry You Home" because it's about a 6 minute. It has this gospel feeling to it. I'd say the songs are worth hearing because they were still trying to do new things and push forward rather than just repeating themselves. But yeah, not everybody likes it, and there is a difference because Peter Wolf isn't there. And when I talked to one of their managers who was with them during their biggest success in the last couple of years, and then I talked to the record label president from EMI America at the time, and they both said that there was just nothing they could do, and they were disappointed how it all just sort of fell apart. And they both tried to get everybody back together, sat down and talked with them and said, look, you're at your peak. You can be even bigger than you already are, which was almost unimaginable how big they did get. And they couldn't make it work out.
Yeah, the quote that I pulled from the book here, Bob Hinkle, who managed the band with Jeb Hart, said, quote, "It was one of the most difficult periods of my life. Jeb and I spent a lot of time on the Eastern Airlines shuttle between New York and Boston, meeting with the band to try to get them to come to their senses. We couldn't do it. We finally had to realize it was not meant to be. It wasn't a surprise, just sad because they were poised for still bigger things."
Yeah.
Yeah, you wonder what could have been if they continued.
Yeah. And they had just finally started getting big in Europe, especially they had toured with the Rolling Stones. And suddenly the Freeze Frame album was doing great in Europe. Their biggest success there. And if they could have capitalized on that and just kept going for 1 or 2 more albums, there's no telling how big they would have become.
And it's still mind blowing to me they're not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I give up on the Rock Hall at this
Yeah, yeah, I give
point.
up on that too.
I
They should
can't
just
even
call it,
figure that out.
yeah, they should just call it music museum or something rather than Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because
Yeah,
they're just
I mean, and having worked in classic rock radio for many, many, many years, Jay Giles is just a staple of FM rock radio. They've got so many songs. That just doesn't
yeah,
make any sense. You do
yeah, it's
cover the
frustrating.
project that the band members did after the breakup of Jay Giles Band in this book. Any standouts for you? Personally, I'm a big fan of Long Line, Peter Wolf's Long Line. That's a great
Yeah,
album.
when I look at those and I did this chronologically, who was working on what, and the weird thing is there were creative differences with the band that was the reason for the given reason for the splinter because Peter Wolf wanted to go back and do more of the earlier blues and R&B stuff, and apparently everybody else wanted to just move on with more of the new wave pop stuff. But then you listen to Peter Wolf's solo album, and it's not as different as you would expect because he really didn't go back to the blues and R&B like you would have expected if that was the reason. He does eventually, like Long Line and Fool's Parade and
Right.
Midnight Souvenirs and all that.
That's
Yeah,
another good one, Midnight Souvenirs.
yeah. That's the tour that I saw him on with solo. I was in Virginia at the time, and I saw him in Virginia. Yeah,
Yeah, some great work
Um,
there. What about the other guys? Any notable records, albums,
Blue,
songs from the other guys?
I like the blues time stuff with Magic Dick and Jay, and then the very last, it's the last listing in there, About Time with Magic Dick and Shun Ying. It's just an EP. It's 6 tracks, and oh man, that is phenomenal. Um, to hear that one, that is phenomenal.
I'd like to see Magic Dick perform live. I don't know if is he retired these days
No,
or
no,
still
even
performs.
this past summer, if I'd been in the New England region, you could have seen Magic Dick. He did a couple shows, I think, with Mark Hummel doing the harmonica blowout type stuff. Danny Klein is out there, performs pretty regularly with his band Full House. So they do Jay Giles sets. It's not a tribute band, it's Danny Klein doing Jay Giles. And then Peter Wolf was doing some shows this summer too. So all
I know
three of
Peter's
those.
been busy. Yeah, I see here
Yeah.
Magic Dick on his website. He's got a show he just performed last month, couple shows in September. So he's still active, which is great.
Yeah.
Born in New London, Connecticut. That's right, New London, Connecticut. Not far, like 45 minutes from where I am right here.
Okay.
Geils Band, every album, every song from Sonicbond Books. Okay, November 1st, the US release date, and then
Yes.
I believe it's out now in the UK. You could go to burningshed.com if you want to order it through the UK outlet. Can people find you online, Jim, if they want to reach out?
I'm on Facebook just under the name James Romag. I don't have any author website or anything like that,
Okay, that's good
but they
enough.
can contact me
Facebook is
through
easy
there.
enough. Yeah. Thanks for doing this book. Like we
Thanks,
said at the
Eric.
top here, you even said it. You're looking around for Jay Giles books, and they're not out there. So we need more of these. And
Nothing there.
I'm looking very much forward to Peter's book when that comes out. You think you said what, March or April of 2025?
Yeah, March 2025. Waiting on the Moon.
Yeah, looking very forward to that. Thanks again, man. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Eric. Nice being here.